Right, welcome folks. Thanks for joining us. Future of Work Scotland. This is your first time, very warm welcome to you. If you've been with us before, welcome back. Before I introduce our speaker, just our normal formalities. We do have a code of conduct, so we just ask in short that you are respectful to one another and everyone to have a great time, a great experience. We will do some community shout outs at the end and our usual sort of format for Q&A. So if you do have questions for our guest speaker, just stick them in the chat. If you would mind prefixing them with a Q, it allows us to spot them amongst all the engagement, sift through them and relay them back to our speaker. And I'm delighted this evening to be joined by Myles Hopkins, all the way from South Africa, Johannesburg. So Myles is our first speaker from the African continent. So delighted and chuffed to have him here. Myles and I have also got to know each other. Our collaborations on Agile 20 Reflect Festival, which kicks off on the weekend. So we'll chat a little bit more about that at the end, no doubt. Myles is the founder and CEO of Be Agile. So they're a global sort of consultancy helping organizations become more disruptive and kind of manage and deal with the kind of current sort of evolving landscape that we live in. And as of late last year, they were the winners of the Community Award category in the World Agility Forum. I got that right, Myles, didn't I? Hopefully.
Yep.
So that's tremendous. And I'm really glad he's here tonight to share some of his insights on perspectives on how do we go about celebrating the current abnormal world that we kind of inhabit. So we'll talk a little bit and explore the kind of impact of COVID and how do we look at the positives of that. And then he'll share some of his experiences in his own domain around business agility. So really looking forward to it. And thanks for joining us, man. It's more welcome to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Seth, and thank you to everybody that's on the call. It's a real pleasure to be chatting to you guys. I do a webinar, just seems to work out about once a month, and sort of tend to be doing all over the world. I'm doing actually with Hasmukh in Kenya in February as part of the festival as well. Done Austin, done London, done India, done Nigeria, done Dubai. So it's really good to be speaking to Scotland. My wife's family originally, I'm talking originally many years ago, comes from Scotland. So my family originally comes from Ireland. So a little bit of the Gaelic there. So really, really great to be chatting to you guys and really sharing time with fellow Agilists, people with similar interests, and hopefully you'll find tonight's presentation a little bit different to the traditional Agile presentations, and they're all fantastic. I just like to look at things in these types of presentations from a more holistic perspective. Just a bit of background about myself is I, believe it or not, don't come from a tech background or an operations background. I actually come from a human resources background. And my consulting company, I started in May this year, it'll be 20 years ago. And most of that time was spent in the HR space, predominantly in the areas of performance management, organization design, HR strategy, etc., etc. But around about 3 years ago, I was doing work with a big financial services company in South Africa and doing another organization design. So another hierarchical structure, another set of role profiles, job descriptions. And that was literally most probably about my 7,000th role profile that I'd written. And I'm not joking about that. That's how many of them I've really written in my life. And I just sat back and I said, I don't really know what value I'm adding to the clients anymore, because the structures to a large extent, other than who approves whose leave and who approves whose performance contract, they don't mean a lot. That's not really how work happens in the in the business. And the role profiles really tie people down to a set of outputs rather than outcomes, and ties them down. So had already had a lot of thinking around Agile and done quite a lot of research into that. So I decided to change the focus of the business to the Agile world, and in particular business agility. My modus operandi is, if I decide I'm going to do something, I jump in feet first. So within a couple of weeks in 2018, I'd gone across to the USA, in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'd done an enterprise business agility strategist workshop with Sally Alata, who is one of the patrons of the Agile 20 Reflect Festival. Came back, and a week after that, I did my SAFE program consultant training. And it was whilst I was doing that, where I'm sitting now 30 people in a room, of which 25 are IT guys, 4 Agile coaches, and then this lone person who comes from an HR background. And I very quickly realized that there's a heck of a lot of difference between doing Agile and being Agile. And the being Agile part of it is a lot about the mindset and the people side of the organization, the culture and the leadership, and how we design teams for flow of work through the system, how we extract, the best value for the organization and for the customers and for employees. And all of this had to come back to the people. So I've since really changed the focus again a little bit, not total focus. The focus is still on business agility, but the people side of it has definitely come back into it. And our company, Be Agile, has a separate company called Be Agile Talent that focuses on the Agile HR stuff. And that's really quite a lot of interest to us, because we think there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered there. So, how do you change reward from a individual-based incentives to team-based incentives? How do you change organizational structures from hierarchical structures to virtual team of team, teams of teams, etc., etc. So there's still a lot of questions to be answered. And the last one that to me are the big question there is, it's all good and well to tell leaders that they've got to move from command and control to servant leadership, but how do we know where they are on that continuum between command and control and servant leadership? Do we still incentivize them for command and control? And certain people, I always use this analogy that certain people will never be servant leaders. It's like asking a hyena to become a Labrador. If you've got that personality, it's going to be very difficult to change you. So the focus of tonight's chat, so that was just a bit of an intro of myself. The focus of tonight's chat, and I'm going to go on to our screen share, and Seth will be watching, and Donald and Nikki will be watching the chat if there's any questions. But tonight's focus will really, first of all, focus on, was COVID-19 a black swan event? What has been the impact of COVID-19? And what's the solution for it? And very much around the business agility part of that. So hopefully you'll enjoy it, and please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. So I'm going to go into the presentation. I'm going to switch my camera off, if you don't mind, whilst I do the presentation part, so that I can focus on the big screen. But let me just share my screen now. So I'm just going to change the display setting quickly. Good. Hopefully that's all good on your side. So let's go straight into it. So first question, was COVID-19 a black swan event? Many people say that it was, and that Black Swan is normally something that you couldn't have predicted. However, in 2015, Bill Gates had a show on YouTube, and he actually predicted that we would have a pandemic in the next 3 to 5 years. And he had over 30 million people that viewed that particular video. So we really think that it most probably was not a black swan event. We should have been able to predict that this was going to happen. Organizations should have been prepared for it. And the fact of the matter is that even when it did hit us, we still weren't prepared for it. Even a year later, it's been almost a year, we're still not prepared for it. I mean, countries are actually having bigger waves of COVID. I mean, you guys in Scotland and in the UK, I was speaking to some colleagues in Paris today. They're going to go into an even harder lockdown. Another colleague in Sri Lanka today, they're in a big lockdown. Obviously, we know it's happened in the USA. And the fact is that even though we know that certain things are potentially disrupted, huge disruptors to us, we don't plan for how we're going to deal with that. And to me, that's a big factor of why we need to speak a lot more about things like business agility, because it's about that anticipating and adapting. And the anticipating is the big part of it. Those organizations, some of them just simply by being in the right place at the right time, but those organizations that anticipated that the world may change one day to be one that was a more remote workplace. Companies like Zoom that we're on tonight. Zoom, I think in the first 3 months of the pandemic, their share prices went up something like 400%. And it's just continued to escalate. So there are some companies that obviously were able to anticipate not necessarily COVID-19, but a scenario where we were going to be working from home a lot more, remote contact, etc., would be needed. And then it was those companies as well that quickly changed once COVID-19 hit. So I remember most probably about March last year when, it was becoming something a lot more serious to, take it a lot more seriously. And I was watching CNN, and a small brewery somewhere in the USA that very quickly stopped actually brewing beer, believe it or not. I mean, that's almost sacrilegious, I'd imagine, for most of us. But they stopped brewing beer and they started making disinfectants and hand sanitizers, because they suddenly saw a much bigger need for that than the breweries. I don't know what you guys are like in the UK, but in South Africa, it's actually banned to sell alcohol, to transport alcohol. It's not banned to buy alcohol. I mean, it's not banned to drink alcohol in the house if you have some. But we've literally banned the alcohol right across the board in a South African context. So for those companies that were able to change again to producing something from their manufacturing lines that were actually needed rather than what their traditional business model was, that's what we're really looking for from an agility perspective. Quite often you'll hear company or people talking about small a agile and big A agile, and you'll also get some people who get quite irritated when you actually say that. But agile itself in a small a is not necessary, is definitely not about a framework. It's how quickly can you adapt to your scenario and be ahead of your competition. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So if you have a look at the immediate impact of COVID-19, you see certain, this is the S&P 500, and you'll see quite a few, sort of big events that happened, like the global financial crisis in October 2007, which hit the stock market by, minus 56.8%. The 9/11 attacks, the SARS attacks, the Black Monday. And then you look at COVID-19. Yes, this was still last year, but it was quite a small, a bit of a smaller impact than, say, the global financial crisis. But what was interesting is that if you have a look at that bottom right, and I will send these slides to Seth and the team so that they can, get them out to everybody. What you find at the bottom right, where I've put it in a red block, is that your S&P 500 literally improved it better than it was before any of these big events, improved by some percentages within the first 6 months. And we did see that to a large extent in the world markets, where we had the pandemic, big, sell-off of stocks and shares, and, not a crash necessarily, but quite a big impact. But very quickly, the stock markets picking up and building up. But obviously, the economies of the world were very radically affected. And this next slide that I want to show you is actually, when I bring the slide up, notice that it's 2020, but it's going to change itself whilst I'm talking to it. And it'll say there's 2021 and then 2022. And what it's really showing to a large extent, yes, in 2020, the world had a massive loss in the economies. Virtually everybody, went downhill. But then when you have a look at 2021 and 2022, you literally see the whole world picking up again, some of it better than others. And interestingly enough, if you have a look at this year, China is the country that has the biggest pickup. And as we know, they're the ones that started the problem for us in the first place. So I think the main message I want to get across with this particular set of graphics is that this year will be better than last year. And next year will more than likely be just as good as this year, if not maybe a little bit better. But that doesn't mean that if your industry did well pre-COVID, that it'll do well in 2021 or 2022. We'll actually have a look on some of the industries that have done better than others. But I think the main thing of the point there is that you need to understand what the world looks like now compared to what it used to be. And that's why sort of the title that I put there is the new abnormal, not necessarily the new normal, because there's very, very little normal about the type of world that we find ourselves in. I mean, again, saying, for example, in South Africa, alcohol is banned at the moment. At the beginning of our first lockdown, we had cigarettes were banned as well. One may ask, well, why cigarettes? It's simply because of our poverty levels, people share cigarettes, so therefore they can transmit the disease by mouth-to-mouth touching of the same cigarette. People having lost jobs, huge jobs, the restaurant industry having been, just crashing out. So there's nothing normal about what we live in right now. However, the opportunities are massive. And again, it's those companies that understand how the world has changed that will, be able to pick up and become really, really thrive post-COVID. Companies again like Zoom, and if you have a look at these particular slides, this is very small, but the winners were companies like Shopify and Cryoport and Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon, and then your losers were companies like BP, United Airlines, Boeing, and those quite a lot of them are fairly obvious. But if you're now United Airlines and you think that the travel market will be the same as it was in 2018, 2019, you're in for quite a big surprise that the travel market will more than likely never get back to those levels that it was in those days, because we've learned that we don't have to travel to have a conference. We don't have to travel to have a meeting. We can do it all online and actually do it pretty well and get on with it, get on with things, save money, save carbon emissions, etc., etc. So again, the point I'm trying to make with that is that if you're in one of those industries that have been severely impacted, you need to question whether your industry will ever get back to where it was before. And if it isn't, then what are you doing about fitting in to this new world that I've termed the new abnormal? So again, these are some of the industries that have performed really poorly and really well. The top 6, had an extra $275 billion that they made between 2018 and 2020, whereas the bottom six lost a combined 373 million. And if you ever look at those bottom six, it's capital goods, insurance, banks, diversified financial, utilities, and energy. And one of the things that reminds me of is, Simon Sinek, when he speaks about, the infinite mindset, is we've got 5 big banks in South Africa. And when I say big banks, they're like 4 of them are about 50,000 employees, and the one that's sort of like the up and coming bank is about 20,000 employees. And if they keep on looking at each other as their main competition and trying to outdo each other, then they're actually losing the plot, because their main threats are the companies they don't even know exist right now. Their main threats are your fintechs. In Africa, your unbanked is 80% of the population. So 80% of 1.4 billion people are unbanked. And it's those companies like where Hasmukh, who's on our call, comes from, places like Kenya and Rwanda, who have these amazing technologies where payment is done through mobile phones with people not having bank accounts at all. Those are the threats to banks. It's not the big traditional competitors. And the sooner you realize that, you've got to really start understanding what it is that your customer wants and needs and the jobs they've got to do, that you'll be able to remain competitive in the industry and stop continuously looking at your normal frame of reference. So the Simon Sinek spoke about a couple of conferences he went to a number of years ago, one of them by Microsoft and the other one by Apple. And both the conferences were focusing on what they could do for the educational industry. And Microsoft, again, they've changed the way they do things now. But in those days, as I say, about 10 years ago, Microsoft spent the whole conference talking about how they were going to be beating Apple, whereas Apple spent the whole conference not once mentioning any other competitors, but actually talking about how they were going to meet the needs of their customers. And obviously, Apple has the right approach. There's a whole market out there. The market hasn't, the number of people that have money, maybe the disposable income has shrunk quite a lot because of COVID, but there's still people out there wanting to spend money. And if you don't understand their wants and needs and the jobs to be done, then, we're really going to struggle. And I think one of the things that Agile is starting to do a lot more of and understand a lot more of is that you need to bring the discovery part much closer to the delivery part. So the discovery part is very much, the design thinking, product innovation, and then, that goes into the handover to the delivery part. So we talk about dual track Agile there, because it's when we understand what our customers want, that customer journey mapping, customer empathy mapping, that we can really start developing products that will meet those wants and needs and, be viable, be valuable, and be usable, which are the 3 things we're looking for there. And I'm still flabbergasted when I look at a number of companies and see that they don't have a CX, a director of CX that sits at the C-suite level, somebody whose main job it is to focus on the customer experience. There's so many companies that still don't have that focus, and they're the companies that are really going to struggle. So today's competitive context, Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, he says, in the new world, it's not the big fish which eats the small fish, it's the fast fish which eats the slow fish. And I mean, I think from us, from an Agile perspective, we know that one of the main things we're driving is speed of delivery. So can we get minimum viable products and minimum marketable products through the system faster than our competitors? So obviously the big guys still have a lot of clout. but today it's those that are quicker to meet the customers' wants and needs that are going to succeed. Rita McGrath, as I think most of you know, Rita McGrath she's sort of taken over as the modern day Michael Porter. Not saying that Michael Porter's that old, but Rita talks about we're working with outdated tools and assumptions. And on the right-hand side of that graph, there is a depiction of what's commonly known as Martek's law. And what Martek's law is basically saying is that the speed of innovation has happened exponentially, whereas the way that we manage businesses has happened logarithmically, meaning that we manage businesses today very similarly to what we managed businesses 30, 40 years ago. And there's a big capability gap growing between the change of innovation and the change in technology that's happening out there versus the way we manage businesses. I mean, I've recently been doing a lot of research into hyper automation. I mean, robotics and robotic processing and natural language processing, machine learning, artificial intelligence. It's not new stuff, but it's crazy again about how many businesses are still not embracing this way of working and getting all of those tasks that can be really repeated, pushing that into a lot more automation space, and then getting humans to focus on the much more value-adding stuff that they could be focusing on. And we're looking at, the 20th century competitive strategy was get big, carve out your position and defend it as if your life depended on it. Whereas in 2021, it's about getting customer obsessed and deliver innovative value faster than your competitors. That's sort of almost at the core of business agility, which I'm going to, touch on a little bit more. So, some of the things that companies are struggling with today is delivering significant organic growth, innovative pace within legacy 20th century structures and cultures, which is very much about that Martek's law. But what we're also finding is that companies, especially these big, especially the big banks, and I do a lot of work in the financial sector, they've spent literally billions of rand on their technology architecture. These legacy systems they talk about that make them highly inefficient. But then they don't want to get rid of them because they spend so much money on them. And it's the very thing that's making them uncompetitive. So, there needs to be a mind shift change there. And, balancing delivering results today with investing in innovation for tomorrow. So we talk about the 3 buckets of work, which is run, grow, and transform. Run is, your normal day-to-day operations, run the business. Grow the business is your products that you already have, your products that you already have, and how do you find new markets for those. Whereas transform is literally where you disrupt your industry before you disrupt it. And we're finding that most companies are spending still 95 to 100% of their time running the business and very little time on innovation and growth. And we're thinking that, 60% should be on run the business. You got to pay, your bread and butter, 20% on growth and 20% on innovation and transformation. And we are starting to see more innovation, but definitely not enough. Adopting new ways of working, even, so this is what companies are struggling to. The more and more companies that we're talking to, particularly about the new ways of working and working from home. I was talking to one of the big banks yesterday, and that's one of the 50,000 banks, and they've made a decision now, even post-COVID, whenever the lockdown's finished, that people will work from home as and when they can, and that'll become the modus operandi, and we'll do our best to not need to come into the office. So they're adapting to the new ways. Find the capacity to drive the strategic change and innovation they know they need, and develop cohesive strategies to solve these collective changes. So when you have a look at this, we talk about business agility, and people say, well, what is this and what is Agile? It's there in our face every single day. You look at these magazine covers, Harvard Business Review, Forbes, McKinsey. If any of you don't subscribe to the McKinsey Agile series, I would strongly recommend it. They really, I'm not being a small consulting company, I'm not a big consulting company fan, but the McKinsey stuff is phenomenal. They really do come up with some fantastic stuff that that you can reference and read and regularly. I mean, literally, there's most probably 10 good articles a week that I'm reading, which really help a lot. So, the writings on the wall. Companies are still, in certain respects. I was talking to one of the big banks in East Africa, one of the guys today, and he said, he's been told he has to implement Agile in his business, but he's having such difficulty. And I said, yeah, even though the word is out there and people know they need to go Agile, there's still quite a big change process that has to happen for us to get everybody on that boat. And some companies will just be slower than others. So if business agility is the recipe, then what are the ingredients? Again, a deeper, more nuanced understanding of our customers. We really need to get in-depth understanding of who our customers are. It reminds me of a software that I saw, it's probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It was in the USA and it was for retail outlets, predominantly the big, retail outlets like Walmart, etc. And literally what this software was able to do is have a look at where the patterns, where if that retail outlet was near a school or a church, or if it was near a school or a church, what were the hours, was it depending on if it was a middle class or lower class. And what this particular software was predominantly doing was telling the shops which articles they should be putting in the checkout queue. So I don't know what it's like in your shops, but in South Africa, I'm sure you guys are pretty much the same, is once you've finished your normal shopping, now you take your trolley and you wait in a queue before you go to checkout. And then they've got all of these other things lined up, like crisps and chocolates and whatever it is. And this particular software will tell you what to put in those aisles at what particular day or what particular time, because if the kids are coming out of school, then you have a different set of products in there. If it's church, people, then it's families that come out. If it's near a football stadium, then you understand when the games are, depending on the weather, is whether you have, cold drinks or not. So, definitely a much more nuanced understanding of their customers. Accelerated experiment-driven innovation. I don't think I need to drive that home with this audience a lot, but I think one of the things we find in Agile, again, is that so often people are getting caught up in the doing Agile within their particular framework, that and again, I know some people will jump up and down when you mention scaled Agile, but the last iteration or sprint of, a quarterly Agile plan is meant to be about innovation, but it very seldom happens because the teams tend to use that last sprint to catch up the work they didn't do on the previous sprint. So very little innovation happens. And if you haven't created that psychologically safe workplace for people to actually be innovative, then innovation is going to die and be suffer its consequences. Improved prioritization, simplified delivery, and tech-enabled efficiency. So again, every single company, even the big guys like Google and Tesla. I had to mention Tesla because it's owned by a South African. Even though they got lots of billions and billions of dollars, they even have a limited budget. It's much bigger than ours, but it's limited. So what are you going to prioritize? Which of your strategic initiatives are you going to prioritize? And again, I know with Agile, the Agile community, we understand prioritization. It doesn't necessarily always work. One of the things we regularly come across consulting into businesses on Agile is this whole issue of matching capacity and demand. You can talk to companies about it. They understand the logic that you have to, balance that capacity and demand, and that you need to prioritize better. But once they get back into the workplace, they just jump into all of their old habits. Um, Evolved approaches to leadership and culture, core technology and agile ways of working. So again, the whole issue of leadership and leading as a servant leader and situational leadership, the culture part. One of the I had a good day, but a day from hell today where I had to get out a whole lot of proposals, and one of the proposals I had to do was for a mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo, um, which is about 46% owned by a big Chinese company, and then the rest is owned by a South African company. But there's a massive problem with the differences in culture between the Chinese expatriates and the Congolese, workers. And so we're putting together a whole intercultural program to address that, because it's not about assimilating culture, but it's about understanding each other's cultures and then being tolerant of each other's cultures. And just an example of that, I mean, one of the things that happens in some African contexts is that your local people will speak very loudly, and it can irritate other people. It's sort of like, well, why are you sort of standing together in a group? Why do you need to shout? And there's a very simple reason for that, is that they don't want other people to think that they're talking about them. So they speak loudly so that everybody can hear what they're saying, so that you know that you're not gossiping about somebody else. So just understanding that will make you more tolerant. And then real time insights to understand what's working, what's not, and where a pivot may be needed. So again, when we talk about that Martech's law and understanding the change, the exponential change in technology and innovation, and then that logarithmic change, the way we manage businesses. We all know how important business analytics and business intelligence is. But I mean, I can imagine that any of you sit back and think, does your company really utilize that to its full efficiency? Are we driving those real time insights to drive what is priority, which customers we're going to service, what are the opportunities within customers, do we need to pivot or not? And the answer is that in many instances, no. There's lots and lots of data, and that's one of the big problems. There's so much data that to actually bring that data and start realizing what to do with it and starting to really become intelligent about the data that you have that drives your business intelligence, I think a lot of companies are really struggling there. And then the targeted outcomes are equally clear: increased customer satisfaction and loyalty, accelerated innovative solutions for real world challenges, increased revenue, increased strategic alignment, simplified delivery, improved collaboration, improved adaptive core tech capabilities, and increased employee engagement and empowerment. So to have a look at business agility, and I'm sure a lot of you have delved into this, but the definition that Evan Laybourne and Sally Alata originally came up with, and then I added 2 words into this. It's very much similar to Klaus Schwab's talking about the fast fish eating the slow fish. It's the ability to anticipate and adapt, to change, learn, and pivot, deliver at speed, and thrive in a competitive market. Because gone are the days when big eats small. Today, fast eats slow, and the ability to disrupt, learn, and deliver faster than competitors may be the only sustainable competitive advantage. The 2 sort of lots of graphics I have at the bottom, the results part comes very much out of Scaled Agile. These are real case studies that customers that have used Scaled Agile. And again, one of the things is when I talk about Scaled Agile, my partner and I, as I say, he's just become an SBCT. We don't drink the Kool-Aid. We don't think that Scaled Agile is the one and only way to do things. There's many ways of doing it, and again, it's that difference between being and doing. But you can see the results there. I mean, Who doesn't want to have a 50% faster time to market, a 50% defect reduction, a 35% increase in productivity, and 30% happier and more motivated employees? And the case studies that you pull out of there, you can see they're not all IT companies. And in fact, there's a very big contingent of government agencies that are using Agile as well. And then the top part is the problems we're trying to solve for, which is ineffective team design, slow time to market, competing business priorities, missing portfolio leadership teams, no discovery, focusing on delivery output, not outcomes, painful planning, demand and capacity not aligned, feature factories, and I'm sure you guys can recognize all of these. I'm just trying to think of these. Teams not empowered, teams not aligned to business outcomes. So why don't we, again, referencing, remember I said in my introduction that I went across to the USA and I did the Enterprise Business Agility Workshop. Well, this is the stuff that we cover in there. It's the 7 pillars of business agility. So it's the customer seat at the table, which again is getting to understand your customers to deliver high impact solution for them to the market faster. Lean portfolio management. We do a workshop, a 3-day workshop on this, and we spend at least 25% of that workshop on lean portfolio management. And that's the aligning, prioritizing, and delivering against your top priorities. Organ team design, we spend quite a bit of time there because, again, it's about putting together these virtual teams that deliver value, increased flow of work through the system. But then also talking about dual track agile and enablement teams, etc. The best way to put together, core services, etc. So spend a lot of time there. Agile mindset and framework, leadership agility, make it stick, which is where we talk about change management and agile HR. And my companies, we've recently developed a rapid change agility framework, which makes change not a project anymore, but something that we literally iterate against almost in sprints. And then the technology agility. And then just the last slide that I wanted to show you before we close off and see if there's any questions or any discussion points is that this is I wouldn't call it a framework or a model, but it's something that Be Agile developed. I love going into companies, and even if I start just at the Agile teams level in terms of coaching and training them and getting them up to speed, I want everybody to understand how this fits into a bigger picture. And that's what the impact model is. It's first of all, if you start at the top right, it's about imagining. So anticipating, exploring, and imagining the emergent changes happening in your market and your customer segments, and developing products and services that meets those wants and needs faster than your competitors. The maximize is about that prioritizing of which strategic initiatives we should drive that deliver the best value at that particular time for your customer and your organization. The perform is very much where we have the agile delivery happening. Adapting is obviously, every quarter we do an inspect and adapt and see if we need to pivot. Captivate is about the people, so creating and driving an authentic culture, mindset, and workplace. And then the transform is literally, do we need to potentially do a much bigger transformation? So I think most of us know the story of Nokia, that used to be a forestry company and became a mobile phone company. And that's their mindset, even though it hasn't been that successful for them recently. But in 2010, I was part of a team. One of the things that I do, I almost call it a hobby because I very seldom get paid much for it, is do future trend analysis. And I was part of a team working with a company in the UK called Shaping Tomorrow. And literally Nokia said to us, here's 25 or here's 5 big topics and 5 subtopics in each of them. Tell us the big changes that'll happen in the next 7 years in these areas in the global economy, and tell us where our opportunities will be. So they wanted to look 7 years out, and it didn't have to be in the mobile industry. And we put together, I quite often look at it because we actually put together a really good set of recommendations for them. They didn't go with hardly any of them, but it's that type of transformation we're happening. Sometimes people think that a digital transformation is a full transformation. It's not. Transformation is transforming every part of your business. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to stop the share and put my video back on. And let's have a chat if there was anything there that was of interest to you, or any questions you had. Very happy to talk about that.
Thanks, Myles. That was great. Really informative. A lot of content on your slide deck there to digest. I don't have any in the chat, but it's quite a small group, so I'm quite happy for anyone who wants to kind of chip in or ask a question to kind of unmute and pipe up if they're happy to do so. You're welcome to do so. I don't see anything in the chat. Something might come up. I guess just to get us started.
I think Jim's got his hand up.
Was he? I don't see Jim. Jim got your hand up? Go, Jim. Floor's yours.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks very much, Myles. That was really interesting. So not for the first time on the Future Work Scotland, we've heard presenters talking about the situations where they go into an organisation and they just discover that they're reluctant, to say the least. The company in question are reluctant. So are those kind of organisations, are they just destined to be the dinosaurs of the future, sooner rather than later? Or is there anything that can be done for that type of, culture, behaviour, mindset?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jim. I think that, so I'm going to answer it in two ways. One, prior to COVID-19, being an Agile consulting company, I had to find one of two scenarios. I had to find either a company where the CEO totally bought into Agile and wanted to drive Agile across the business, or I had to find a company that had a burning platform. Now, of course, COVID-19 created a burning platform for virtually every company, so selling of Agile has been a little bit easier. We took a hit at first because literally overnight when we had our lockdown, all our clients just said, stop, nothing, for the next, but we knew that it would come because now every company literally had a burning platform. I think to go back to the core of your question though, if the leadership is not ready for the transformation, and if there is not big pressure on them to change, they're not going to change. And even if there is big pressure on them to change, it does not necessarily mean they'll change in the right way. They will be listening to whatever makes sense to them at that particular time, and then they will tend to go with that. Some of them will be successful and others won't. To go to your question about the dinosaurs, I do think that we're going to see a lot more dinosaurs in coming down the road. A lot more of your Kodaks and Blockbusters, etc. Those companies that don't understand that the world has changed radically. That I'll just use a simple example of some of the restaurant experiences I've had since lockdown, where the restaurants are complaining because they're not allowed to have people come and eat in their establishments, yet they are allowed to deliver food. So a lot of them obviously went into the delivery route. First of all, put up their prices radically to cover the delivery, which is understandable, but then delivered, excuse my expression, really crappy food. And now I'm sitting at home, so I have the opportunity to, because we've got Uber Eats here and we've got something very similar. So I've got the opportunity to order from 100 restaurants. So if you're not going to change the way that you run your business to meet the needs of the customer, then you're going to go out of business. And those are the guys that are going to complain. Some companies, the markets, I do quite a bit of work in the mining industry. I'm not sure the impact will be massive for them. But then in the financial industry, I do think that those companies that are not understanding how the world has changed, how people have become more online, how people are going to become less and less going into branches, the different types of products we may need going forward because of the fact that we work from home. So, who's funding the home office? Is there solutions for that, like loans, etc., etc. So I definitely think if companies take no action or don't realize that their world has changed, if they don't go out of business, they've just been lucky. I think that they're going to struggle.
Thanks very much, Myles.
Thanks, Jim. I see there's some questions here.
Sorry, I was talking away there on mute. Similar-ish question from Andrea. So I think it's the same sort of thing, but I guess this is quite interesting in that it's specific to. So this is obviously a challenge that she's currently facing. So very, very real for her personally in the work. How do you change a culture of management if they don't buy into customer experience? And I'm struggling with this in my organization, and they keep ignoring what the business wants. And we are also undergoing digital transformation. So that's quite an interesting mix.
It is an interesting mix, and it's unfortunately you must probably not alone. Again, like I was saying, the number of companies where I have a look at and don't see somebody that's head of customer experience sitting at a C-suite is crazy. I mean, that should be the right-hand person. That's what we're in business for. And I know that I'm stating the obvious. We're in business to service customers. And if we don't service customers, then somebody's going to start eating our lunch very, very quickly. But the question is, how do you change the culture of management if they do not buy into the customer experience? I suppose there's a couple of ways. One, you're not going to be able to change this one, but the market will change it. Is that if we don't meet the needs of the customer, somebody else is, and we're going to lose market share, and the shareholders are going to ask the question. The other side, I guess, to a large extent, and again, this doesn't necessarily mean you can be successful at this, but I've always tried my best to use analytics, just to say, if we were to capture 7% of this market or 8% of that market, this is the potential bottom line revenue we can be driving, the profitability. So, your CEOs and financial directors understand pounds and pence. And if you're speaking at a more people focused, and I had this problem a lot with when I was in the HR space, that's why I also turned that almost always into a dollars and cents discussion. It's just literally to bring it into the analytics and say, look, this is, if we don't do this, this is the potential of the customers we could lose because our competitors are doing it. So there's that whole competitor landscape, discussion you've got to have, understanding what your competitors are doing, where they actually are taking customers from, looking at the market again. If I speak about the African market, it's the same size as India or China. It's 1.3, 1.4 billion people, and I say to you that 80% of them are unbanked. there's huge opportunity, huge potential. But if you're not going to focus on what that particular customer needs, so there's a couple of books I have in my bookcase here. One of them is called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, and the other one's called The 86% Solution. And they talk about how you've got to think differently about the customers in those markets that are poor, because instead of me selling, if I'm selling you food, understand that most people in these poor countries don't have a fridge. So you're selling people stuff on a day-to-day basis. So you're selling them smaller bits. If you don't understand those customers, I can promise you some people are, and some people are making lots and lots of money out of understanding that customer. So I think either they've got to be hit hard from their shareholders, but from your perspective, if you're able to bring that into almost like a mini business case as to this is why we should, I think if it's a question of, if we don't do this, we're going to lose customers. If they don't already know that, they're more than likely not going to listen to you. And I mean, again, I'm generalizing. You have to bring it down to statistics, pounds and pence for them.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I think these are all going to have recurring themes and all kind of be related. So Thomas is asking, like, for major change within organizations, how does Agile answer the question? So it probably speaks quite directly to some of your work. And so questions like, what will I get? And will I get it? And how much will it cost? Which are common questions. We face those questions quite a lot, and some of them can be quite difficult to answer. So, you're doing this sort of thing directly, regularly on a daily basis. Well, how do you go about approaching that? How do you sell it in, right?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that I'd like to say is that Agile is not the answer to everything. So again, with my mining clients, my construction clients, we're not going to be doing 2-week minimum or 2-week iterations of sinking a mine shaft. The mine shaft is planned. It's normally a $1.5 billion to $2 billion project. And once we get going, it's going to be a waterfall project. But in the mining space, a lot of technology is coming in. So Internet of Things, robotics, etc. So that's where we can definitely use Agile in, again, from a software development perspective. So that's where we would use the Agile in the mining industry. But to come back to your question, so what's the business case for the agility? If you're running, so it's most probably twofold. One, are you just going to be doing run the business? So, business as usual, not going to change a heck of a lot. Then potentially the payback is not as big, even though having a look at the way that you deliver. I mean, the main thing about Agile is that we want to deliver quicker, and we want to be able to adapt quicker as well. So and I always use the example when I do my training of like the mobile phone. So if you come to me and you say you want to develop a new mobile phone, and you want it to have 6 cameras, and you want it to have a data projector built into it, in your old traditional way of doing things, we would have gone away, did a business requirements document, and 18 months later we would have bought you this big clunky thing, which you would have said, oh, it's totally impractical, and it's not what I envisaged in any case. So from an Agile perspective, we're able to very quickly show what the products will look like, where we can. One of the big things that stuck out to me with Agile was there's value in the work that's not done. That first of all sounded to me that didn't sound right, but it makes so much sense now, because what is it that we can cut out of the system that we don't have to do to get to those minimum marketable products? But I guess, without going through the whole Agile framework or whatever, I think the main thing is, if you have a look at, Klaus Schwab and Evan Labor and Sally Alata definitions, it helps you get to market quicker than your competitors. If your competitors are doing Agile, then maybe you don't get there quicker than your competitors. But it definitely allows, there's so much evidence that Agile allows you, makes you speedier than companies that have not embraced Agile. When we train on the Enterprise Business Agility Strategist workshop, we say there's three main metrics that we drive. It's flow. So Agile helps you to flow the work through the system a lot quicker than if you're not doing Agile. It's the value. That's the main thing. What is the value that you're driving? So we're able to realize value quicker because we're getting it through the system quicker. And there's quality, because there's continuous learning, continuous improvements, continuous innovation. Your quality is improving all the time as well. And again, that one slide that had those 4 metrics, 50% faster time to market. Anybody that's not wanting those metrics in their company most probably shouldn't be at the head of the company.
Okay. So interesting thoughts here. This is quite an interesting one, just because I think some of this will be kind of touched upon in various sort of events in the program, the festival. But so governments are having to act faster, right? So think of what governments have been through, trying to handle and cope with COVID and the situation. How could they kind of best adopt Agile approaches to improve performance decision making? Any thoughts on that? Well,
yeah, no, definitely. So if you think about it, I mean, I just think about the experiences I have, the good experiences and the bad experiences I have with my own government. And remember, we sit in an African country. Yes, we're most probably more advanced than most other African countries, but there's if Ashmuk is still on, there's most probably stuff that happens in Kenya that would definitely be better than what's happening in South Africa. But the more we can do and the more services we can offer to our citizens online, the better. And generally, there's online solutions would be developed by software engineers, development teams, and the Agile teams will be able to generally, again, get the products to market a lot quicker, and again, making sure that we're not wasting money and time on developing the wrong stuff, which tends to have quite often happened in waterfall projects. So I think there's, again, if you have a look at there's a lot of American government agencies that are using Agile. And it's because they're trying to, it's the whole e-government, drive. The more we can get online, the quicker we can service our citizens, and most probably a lot cheaper as well. So definitely, I think government has, I'm not doing the Kool-Aid thing. I saw you like that comment, Seth, is, yeah, I mean, Scaled Agile has a particular service offering just for government. And it's a little bit different because your focus is not on profitability, but it is on cost. So it's not a heck of a lot different to the way you would approach for private sector organizations, but there is obviously quite a big difference in the metrics you'd use.
Yeah. So it depends on what you're actually trying to measure and what things are worth measuring and how you're going to show that you're delivering against outcomes and things like that. No, that's good. I've got one, but just before I go into that, because it might take us in a slightly different direction. We've still got about 10 minutes or so, so I'm sure a couple of other things might come up. but just related to the sort of customer experience chat we were having earlier, and back to Andrea's question. So Jim's got a kind of follow up. So in relation to the CX role, how do we see that role different from a traditional sort of lean value stream manager role? Any comment or thoughts on that?
Yeah, so again, I think there's quite a big difference. If you have a look at your strategic initiatives and your epics, etc. If I speak the safe terminology, but let's talk about let's rather leave it at the strategic initiatives, which tend to become your value streams. Not all of those are customer focused, even though at the end of the day, they will contribute to improving customer satisfaction. Some of those value streams may be something to do with employees. So it's about, potentially how do we improve the engagement of our employees, because if we know that if we improve our employee value proposition and our engagement, there's a direct impact on bottom line for most companies that do that. So that would be, a value stream within the business that have a look again how we would do that, but that would not be the role of the person who's the head of customer experience. Most of our strategic initiatives would hopefully fall into improving or innovation around what we can offer our customer. But again, that doesn't necessarily equate into customer experience. Customer experience is that whole customer journey from when I'm considering your product through to purchase, after sales, service, etc., etc., etc. So that's the journey part. But when we're doing the innovation around products that we're developing for the customer, that a lot of that innovation that's happening will take the customer journey into account, but it won't necessarily be something that's directly. I'm trying to word this because I'm almost talking myself into a corner here. It's about the customer journey and it's about the customer experience, but we sometimes have what we build into some of our systems, what we call non-functional requirements. That's not about the journey. It's about enabling the functional requirements to work so that we can deliver better on the customer experience. So not everything in the value streams will necessarily be something that is as a direct accountability of the person who's head of customer experience. And I think the other thing that we maybe this is one of the things I grapple with quite often as well, Seth, is that even if a company has decided to go agile, it doesn't mean that the whole company itself will go agile. So we will still have traditional parts of the business. So if we look at agile and teams of teams working in iterations and delivering value, that may not necessarily work in a traditional call center. So we have, for example, in some companies, the company Chad came out of, it's most probably the leading company in South Africa on Agile, but they've still got some parts of their business which hasn't changed very much in the last 15 years, because Agile was not necessarily something that would have driven their part of the business forward. Again, if they were looking for improved technology, they would have gone to their IT department that would have used Agile to develop that for them. But not every part of the business is necessarily embracing the full set of Agile principles, etc., if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, because I think large organizations, I think sometimes can falsely try to, they want to become more agile businesses or completely agile businesses, and it's not realistic, and different operations do work in different ways, so they have different needs. As you said earlier, in some cases agile might not be the best way forward. I mean, if your work's very sort of deterministic and predictable, and you kind of know what you need to do, and you can kind of accurately sort of guesstimate, estimate, and predict how long it's going to take, then you don't really need Agile. Agile is only going to help you if there's a lot of unpredictability about what you're doing, and you want that to evolve over time.
Yeah.
Knowing you want, you're gonna, you need emergence. You need to be able to manage that through and learn as you go. But yeah, it doesn't always apply in some traditional operations, so you don't need it. So I think that the concept of an agile business is only going to apply to small startups that can really embrace those kind of mindsets and those behaviors and truly be agile, because they're trying to, compete in a particular marketplace and trying to get, some market share. So to do that, they want to be fast and then not lose out to the competition. A bit like your slide earlier about moving quickly. So yeah, I think that's probably.
Yeah, I think the one thing I just wanted to add to that is that Evan Laybourne, who's head of the Business Agility Institute, he'll always say you can only be as agile as your least agile department. So now that almost counteracts what I've just said. But essentially what he's saying then, it's the same with me when I go into, so some companies will phone in their HR department, will say, we want you to come talk to us about agile HR and da 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 da. And I'll go and I say, the first thing I'll say to them is, I'm not here to talk to you about how you can make your department more agile. I'm here to talk to you about how you're going to enable agility across the rest of the business. So a much more external focus. Yes, I can help you make your recruitment process more agile, some of your learning development, but the main focus of functions like HR and finance and legal and procurement, et cetera, is how do they enable those parts of the business that are adopting agile to be more agile. So if it's the HR again, how have you put together a reward and recognition structure and a performance structure that enables agility, enables and drives team over individual, etc. Because that's what I'm much more interested in than how you use agile in your own department.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And yeah, we talked about that before, didn't we? About the importance of agile HR and how it needs to really look at its operation in the best interests of enhancing culture in the organization and ultimately making the org more agile. No, brilliant, great. We've got a few more minutes. I had one for you, if you don't mind. So I was kind of intrigued by your, at the end you close with your kind of impact model. I've kind of wanted to chat to you about it for a while. I mean, you had the slide up there. I guess what I'm curious about is how does that sit alongside, some of the kind of, typical agile frameworks? How do they work? How complementary are they? How do you kind of use it alongside? So say you're in an org and you're using SAFe. Does it work? Do you bring the two together? What does that look like?
Yeah, so if I was to so let me maybe take a step back and tell you why I actually developed it in the first place. Is that way too often I find organizations going into agile transformation. I mean, my one client that I recently started with in Nigeria, or where we recently started, Chad's actually running with them, not me, is, and we had another one in Botswana not long ago where we go in and do the agile part. They've got another set of consultants that are doing the strategy, another set of consultants that are doing the org design and the culture. And none of these consultants ever talk to each other. Now, literally, the guys that are doing the strategy, your agile transformation should be taking that work and implementing it. So if you're not talking to each other, then the agile part is going to implement stuff that is not part of the strategic initiatives and the value streams that you should be implementing. So that was the first part as to why I thought, that we would start developing and again, I don't even know whether I call it a framework or a model or a reference point or whatever it is. Then I was exposed to Gabrielle Benefield's Mobius Loop, which we're obviously doing a session next week with her on that, so that should be fun. And Gabrielle's work really spoke about the discovery and the delivery, but not, again, so much about the strategy. She was much more about what are the products we're going to discover, and then how do we push that through to delivery. So the idea behind the impact model is just to say, if we're doing something in the organization, let's make sure we understand how it fits in with all the other things that are happening in the organization. So first of all, strategy, innovation, then about prioritization and how we budget and resource, then about the delivery part, which is really much about the agile, then how do we adapt and how do we captivate, the people side of it, and how do we transform. So we could go into what we do with the model a bit is we go in and we say, where are your current pain points? Okay, so your current pain points might be at the maximize, which is the prioritization part of it. So let's work with that, but let's not lose sight that your prioritization happens as a result of what you've determined you wanted to do in your strategy and innovation part, so your imagine, and that it's going to then lead into your perform part, which is your agile delivery. How it stands there, I don't often take it and say, okay, this part is that part for safe or whatever it is. However, there is some rough similarities. As we know, SAFe 5.0 started embracing business agility. I think they're still quite immature in that area. 5.1 is coming out in February. But there is still definitely some of the strategic initiative stuff there. There is the prioritization stuff there. There is the delivery stuff there. There is the adapting stuff there. There is the captivating stuff there, and there's the transform there. So I could take it and match the two together, but it was more a reference point for me to talk to executives to say that whatever we do, let's make sure that we're looking at the picture holistically, and particularly if there's strategies, consultants that are working on different parts of the business, let's make sure they are all talking to each other, because at the end of the day, your agile teams are more than likely going to have to deliver what's happening at a higher level. So let's make sure they're delivering, the right stuff at the end of the day. Yeah, Craig, you're right. There's not much about strategy and SAFe. That's why I said earlier on, it's their business agility stuff literally came from lots of discussions with Sally, actually. So they took a lot of their thinking from Sally's area, but they're nowhere near as mature as Sally's thinking on business agility.
Fab. No, that sounds good. Great to hear. Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground. I think it's a broad topic, as you know better than I do, and I think I think there's going to be lots of opportunities to learn more about that over February, but we'll get that onto that in a second. But before we do, we've only got 5 minutes. So first of all, Myles, listen, thanks for joining us. Pleasure hosting you this evening. Great to have you join us. As I say, you're our first speaker from the African continent. So yeah, really delighted and honoured to have you here. And as I've got to know you over Agile Try to Reflect working together, it's great to see you in a slightly different capacity. So thanks for that really insightful session. So yeah, I'll give you my applause. If everybody else can join me. Okay, there you go. The virtual applause.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation. Really enjoyed chatting to you guys.
Thanks, mate. So just in the remaining 5 minutes, just a few just a quick usual shout outs. Before I get into some of the upcoming events, etc., just want a wee announcement from our own side. In terms of future of work. So I'm delighted that Nicola Bennett, who's on the call today, is newly joined our organising team. So it's nice to give Nikki a little shout out, because this is her first official kind of gig joining us as part of the org team. And I forgot to give her a shout out at the start, which I was intending to do. So my bad, Nikki, my bad. So we're delighted she's on board, and she's got lots of fab ideas, and she's working closely with Donald and I around the event programme for the year ahead. So just on that, We do obviously have a couple of events for you already in the diary. They've been there for a while. And those are part of our offering for Agile 20 Reflect, which is the upcoming global festival to mark and celebrate the 20th anniversary of Agile since the original signing of the manifesto. So Myles and I, as I've mentioned a couple of times, have worked closely on that as part of the organising team as trustees, and we've both wore various hats. It's worth saying there are over 500 events in this programme that we worked up with collaborations across the globe. You know, there are numerous SMEs involved, many people putting forward events, everybody being very generous with their time and opening up their learning. We're working closely with a lot of the large organisations, certificate authorities. We have a global network of over 80 people across the globe who've been working closely with our team to help get this embedded locally. So although it is a global festival, it's decentralized. So we really have been working with Agile communities across the globe to spread the word and go from this global idea to that kind of local feel. And ultimately, it's about learning and coming together and connecting and community. So, you know, we're all passionate, those of us have been involved in bringing people together. And that's what this is about. I will share the URL for the site, but directly into the calendar. So do please have a look. I'd encourage you to do so. I'm sure Myles would say the same. There's so much at offer. We don't want people to miss out. There is literally something for everyone, whether you'd like to learn more about business agility or personal agility, or hear more about the history of Agile, the origins, join some panel discussions. That's what we've got for you next week. That one's full, I think, now, but there's so much on offer. Just take a look. You're bound to find something that's of interest to you, and I hope you do. A lot of people have worked very hard to put this together, and it has grown, I guess, beyond the expectations of the team. So it's really turned into something huge. So, you know, we want everybody to celebrate it and get involved and make the most of the month. Events will run throughout February. So I don't know, Myles, if there's anything else you want to say in addition of that, the remaining couple of minutes, as a fellow trustee, anything you want to add?
I think that, as Seth says, it's just really gone way beyond expectation. And there were two main reasons why I got involved. Was one, there's so much fracture in the Agile community, and part of the vision was to build bridges and build bridges for the future. And then the second was really to build a big community. There's so much good that comes out of Agile, and we're seeing some fantastic stuff happening. So hopefully we'll achieve both those things that I was really looking for. So it's going to be, sorry, I'm about to sneeze. So it's going to be a great event.
Brilliant.
Or set of events.
Absolutely. Programme of events. I'll let Myles go away and have his sneeze and drink his water.
And it's all free.
Say again?
And it's all free.
It's all free. Good point. Thank you, Donald. It's all free. It's no cost attached. I can't believe I forgot to say that. It's all free, folks. And that's been part of it too. It's community-led, community-driven, for the community, by the community. So we're keen that it has that community feel, and yeah, everyone is welcome. So do spread the word. Take a look at the programme. I'm sure you're bound to find something that appeals to you. I'm going to wrap it up there because we're bang on time. Thanks again to Myles for joining us this evening. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for your participation as ever. Look out for other things coming up in the programme, and enjoy the rest of your day, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you happen to be. And we hope we'll see you again soon. All the best. Take care. Look after yourselves, folks.
Thanks, Myles. Thanks, Alf.
Thanks,
Bye now.
guys.